Before we dive into the video, we want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor Raycon and a product we genuinely love using while researching and editing these stories, Raycon's bone conduction headphones. These headphones have been a serious game changer for multitasking, especially when we're deep into case files but still need to stay aware of what's around us. Instead of blocking your ears, they use bone conduction technology to send audio through gentle vibrations so you get clear music, podcast, or calls without tuning out your surroundings. They're also built for all-day use, 13 hours of battery life, IP68 waterproof and dustproof, and a secure off-ear fit that doesn't slip. Raycon also delivers premium performance at about half the price of big audio brands, and with Black Friday around the corner, Raycon audio products are up to 30% off site-wide. From everyday essentials to the latest releases, it's the perfect time to upgrade your sound or get ahead on gifting. These early deals won't last long, so shop now before they're gone. Over 3 million customers already love them, and they come with a 30-day happiness guarantee, so you can try them risk-free. Click the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/unpredictablebc to get up to 30% off during Raycon's Black Friday and Cyber Monday sales. It's January 13th, 1999 in Baltimore, Maryland. Classes at Woodlawn High School had just let out, and more than 1,600 students quickly spilled into the parking lot and nearby streets. On most days, the rush out of Woodlawn was routine, kids hurrying to catch their bus, make it to practice, or clock in for a part-time shift. The forecast had been calling for freezing rain in the coming days, so most students were just eager to get home. Among them was 18-year-old Hae Min Lee, an honors student and athlete just weeks away from graduation. Like most afternoons, Hae planned to pick up her 6-year-old cousin from kindergarten around a 10-minute drive away. But when Hae never showed, her family grew concerned. She usually took this responsibility seriously, and her absence hinted that maybe something was wrong. She was scheduled for a shift at LensCrafters later that day, but when her manager informed Hae's family that she hadn't shown up, their concern turned into fear. And although it had only been around 3 hours since she'd last been seen at school, Hae's family called the police. Within days, Hae's disappearance prompted a full-scale investigation. Authorities interviewed friends, family, and classmates, trying to piece together her movements. This call on January 13, 1999 set in motion a series of events that would unravel the lives of Hae's friends and family and spark a controversy that persists to this day. What began as a missing persons case soon spiraled into something far more complex, with conflicting timelines and shifting testimonies. A case that would go on to grip Baltimore and eventually the world for decades to come.
There's no reason for this disappearance, and it's very troubling to the family, and we as investigators want to find her as soon as we can.
It was around 6 p.m. that day when police were dispatched to Hae's home after the call reporting her missing. The first officer to arrive, Scott Adcock, started by piecing together the basics: her physical description, the details of her car, which was also missing, her phone number, her schedule that day, and anything that might help them figure out where she'd gone. Hae's family anxiously shared any and all information they thought might help. For them, this was already a nightmare. Hae had immigrated from South Korea with her family a few years earlier, and in Baltimore, where they now lived, she quickly found her place. At Woodlawn High School, she carried a 3.8 GPA in the school's magnet program, a specialized program focused on STEM subjects. She thrived in sports, playing lacrosse and field hockey, even serving as manager of the boys' wrestling team. But most importantly, she was surrounded by a close-knit group of friends in the magnet program, and at the center of that circle was her best friend Aisha Pittman. After being given Aisha's phone number, Officer Adcock called her, hoping she might have seen or heard from Hae, but she hadn't. Adcock then turned to another name that quickly surfaced: Adnan Syed, Hae's ex-boyfriend, who would later become central to the case. Upon calling him, Adnan, high at the time, said he didn't know where Hae was. He explained that he had asked her for a ride after school that day, but he'd been delayed, and assumed she got tired of waiting and left without him. Adnan Syed was described by many Woodlawn students as a popular guy. He was 6 feet tall, handsome, and athletic, playing football and running track. He was in the magnet program with Hae, and after asking her to prom in junior year, they hit it off. While the exact dates are unclear, Adnan and Hae had been in a relationship for around 10 months, something that Hae chronicled in detail in her diary. On April 27, 1998, she writes, "I keep on falling deeper and deeper into him. He is the cutest, sweetest, and coolest guy, and he loves me. The bad thing is that we have to keep things secret, but it's okay, 'cause love conquers all." Since both Adnan and Hae's families would disapprove of them dating, they kept their relationship hidden. Late-night calls became their routine, paging each other after their parents had gone to bed and talking until the early hours of the morning, sometimes even 3 or 4 a.m. Of course, they couldn't visit each other's homes and only spent time together when they found excuses their parents would believe. But while the relationship itself was built on mutual love and respect, the secrecy and family pressure on both sides made it hard to sustain. Towards the end of 1998, the two were frequently on and off, with Hae feeling particularly guilty that their time together might be pulling Adnan away from his religion. His religion and Muslim customs are the main thing. It irks me to know that I'm against his religion. He called me a devil a few times. I know he was only joking, but it's somewhat true. I hate that. It's like making him choose between me and his religion. By November 1998, it seemed that Adnan's parents had become aware of their relationship and had actually confronted Adnan at a homecoming dance he wasn't supposed to go to. According to her diary, Hae felt conflicted. She knew that she loved Adnan but didn't want to stand in the way of his family or his religion. Soon, though, she'd get the push she needed to end things. By December 1998, Hae had become infatuated with another man, Don, a coworker at LensCrafters where she worked. He was a few years older than Hae, had baby blue eyes, and as Hae mentioned, had a nice Camaro. Hae described him in her diary as more mature than Adnan and someone she would have gone for in the past. But eventually, she does. And while it's not clear exactly when Hae and Adnan broke up, on New Year's Day, Hae goes on a date with Don and writes about it fondly in her diary. The last entry in Hae's diary, one day before she went missing, reads, "I love you, Don. I think I have found my soulmate. I love you so much. I fell in love with you the moment I opened my eyes to see you in the break room for the first time." Naturally, Officer Adcock, still at Hae's house at this point, wanted to speak with Don, but he wasn't able to reach him until the following morning, and when he did, Don couldn't offer much. He explained that he hadn't talked to Hae since the night before and had no idea where she might have gone. With no leads from Hae's closest friends or Don, police had little to go on. The next step was to search any areas where she or her car might have ended up. They called local hospitals, motels, hotels, checked high school parking lots, and used dogs to search the woods and streams near Woodlawn. But still, nothing. It had seemed as if Hae, after leaving school on January 13th, had disappeared into thin air. And for police, the search wasn't getting any easier. In the 2 days after Hae went missing, Baltimore was hit with a massive snowstorm, leaving the city and schools mostly closed for Thursday and Friday. The following Monday was also Martin Luther King Day, which meant schools stayed closed and emergency services were busy dealing with injuries as a result of the icy conditions. By the time students got back to school that Tuesday, it was clear Hae Min Lee was still missing, but it didn't quite trigger the kind of alarm you might expect. Hae was nearing the end of her senior year, and being a part of the magnet program and a straight-A student, had all of the credits she needed to graduate. It wasn't unusual for magnet students to take half-days or skip school altogether to go to work or just hang out off campus, so her absence at school wasn't too unusual. Most students took her absence to mean she was probably spending time with her new boyfriend Don, or even in California visiting family, an early rumor that was spread among students. All this to say that during that first week, while students, teachers, and of course family were concerned about where she was, most believed that she could take care of herself, and was most likely just fine. But as the second week rolled around and still no word from Hae, the investigation started picking up. Police figured they'd interview Don. After all, he was the last person Hae wrote about so fondly in her diary the night before she went missing. If there was anyone who would know where Hae would go, it would be him. So on January 22nd, 9 days after Hae's disappearance, they called Don in for an interview. He explained that the two had spent the evening of January 12th together and had spoken on call until the early hours of the 13th. According to Don, the day Hae went missing, he was at work all day, something one of the LensCrafter managers later confirmed. Seemingly satisfied with this explanation, police noted his account and quickly moved on from him, largely taking his alibi at face value. That same weekend, their attention turned to the other boyfriend, Adnan. The lead detective on the case now, Detective Joe O'Shea, managed to reach him by phone. Adnan explained that on the day Hae went missing, he'd been in class with her until the final bell, then went about his day as usual, insisting he never actually saw her leave. When asked about their history, Adnan admitted that they had dated the year before, and said the relationship ended over religious differences, but he assured the detective that they were still good friends. With both boyfriends seemingly accounted for, detectives turned to the wider circle, Hae's school. If anyone knew her routines, her moods, or her last steps that day, it would be the people who saw her every afternoon. Most recalled that their last interaction with Hae was when school let out on January 13th, but one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Whenever Hae's name was brought up, more often than not, Adnan's would be brought up too. They had been an item after all, and their dramatic whirlwind of a romance was common knowledge among students and staff. With this in mind, investigators began asking about Adnan's whereabouts as well as Hae's. Who had seen him? Where was he that day? Where did he go? On that point, the answers were a little murky. Most could recall little about the day Hae went missing. It had seemed ordinary at the time, unremarkable until Hae's disappearance came to light. Still, several students recalled seeing Adnan in school as usual. After classes ended, he would have had a window of free time before track practice, a practice his coach told police he typically attended. Although, upon questioning, he admitted that he couldn't exactly remember if Adnan was at practice the day of the 13th. All he could say is that he usually attended practice. Days slipped by with no trace of Hae, and the school's memories offered little more than a blur of routine. And as more and more time passed, it seemed police were becoming increasingly suspicious of foul play. They began putting ads in local newspapers in an attempt to probe the public for more information. They even issued a subpoena for Hae's email records and activity. But just as their search efforts were gaining momentum, a discovery surfaced that would completely alter the course of the investigation. On February 9, 1999, Mr. S., a groundskeeper from Coppin State University, was on his way back to work after a quick trip home to grab some tools and a beer. Within this short 15-minute ride, Mr. S., having downed almost half the beer already, felt the need to pee. But instead of waiting until he reached his workplace, he pulled over on Franklintown Road and walked into the woods, looking for a spot hidden from the passing cars. Keep in mind, it was still winter in Baltimore at this time, so the trees were bare and the ground was covered in patches of snow and ice. Yet despite this, Mr. S. kept walking further and further into the woods, towards a fallen log near the stream, and it was on the other side of this log that Mr. S. would make a discovery that shook the city of Baltimore. Black hair poking out of the dirt, barely visible through the soil and leaves. While trying to find a secluded place to pee, Mr. S. had stumbled upon a body. Upon calling the police and leading them to his discovery, the next step that investigators would have to take is the daunting task of excavating and identifying the body. According to reports, the victim seemed to be a young Asian female who had been hastily dumped, evident in the unnatural bend of her limbs and the shallow grave she was lying in, covered only by a thin layer of dirt. A few items were found surrounding the site as well, including a half-empty pint bottle and a section of clothesline. The cause of death was determined to have been manual strangulation, with additional evidence of blunt force trauma to two parts of the head. With a fingerprint match in hand, police's search for their missing person was over. They were looking at the body of Hae Min Lee. Slowly, the tragic news spread throughout the community. The police, of course, notified Hae's family first, who then let Hae's best friend Aisha know, and from there, the devastating news passed from friend to friend, until it finally reached Adnan. When he heard the news, like so many, he was speechless. Krista, one of Hae and Adnan's friends, recalls that when she called to break the news to him, he stood silent for minutes on the other end. That night, several of Hae's friends agreed to meet at Aisha's house to process the news together. In between the tears and grief, Adnan recalls insisting that there had to be a mistake, and this body must have been that of someone else. He had even called a detective working on the case for more information, sure that the body they found could not have been Hae. The next day, though, the word had spread, and it wasn't long before every student at Woodlawn knew. Students were encouraged to reach out if they needed support, and staff, students, as well as the community came together to hold a public vigil on February 17th to grieve the loss of the fiercely beloved Hae Min Lee. But for the police, their work was just getting started. A missing persons case had just turned into a homicide, and now a grieving community would be looking to them for justice. They began compiling a list of suspects, starting off first with the man who found the body, Mr. S. himself. Certain things about Mr. S.'s past and the circumstances under which he found the body struck investigators as suspicious. First and foremost, his criminal record. Mr. S. was a habitual streaker, having been charged 8 times in his life with indecent exposure, once directly in front of a female officer. But aside from this, police also became interested in how Mr. S. found the body to begin with. He claimed to police that he had pulled over to the side of Franklintown Road on his way back to work to pee, but the place where he stopped was only minutes from his workplace. Why not bear it a few more minutes until he reached a proper bathroom? Why pull over at all? Secondly, when he did pull over, many believed he walked unusually deep into the forest, around 127 feet on snow-covered and icy grounds, climbed over a fallen tree, then happened to pass the exact place Hae Min Lee was buried. Although, others have noted that in winter, when the trees are bare, the road is still visible, so going that far into the forest would have been normal to be able to pee without being seen from the road. And although the burial site is usually described as hastily arranged, with just a thin layer of dirt and a few stones over the body, it was nonetheless difficult to spot. The city surveyor, the person who measures the precise layout of the site, later said that he nearly stepped on the body while trying to look for it. So the question arose, how did Mr. S, someone who was just looking for a place to pee, manage to find it? All of these strange coincidences did not bode well for the former streaker turned groundsman, and it was these concerns that led police to bring Mr. S in for a polygraph test. Are you attempting to withhold any information about the death of the female you found in the park? Did you do anything to that girl to cause her death? Have you ever been in the company of that girl you found before the day you found her? With each question, Mr. S's answer was the same. No, no, and no. But the polygraph was telling a different story. The examiner's notes read, Mr. S seemed to be preoccupied with outside issues. He appeared nervous and time-conscious. Final call, deception indicated. Although polygraph results are not considered admissible evidence in court, a failed polygraph test did not look good for Mr. S. So police brought him in again for another test a few days later, asking him variations of the same question and making them less open-ended. Do you know if that girl you found died because she was stabbed with a knife? Do you know if that girl you found died because she was shot? And so on with many different forms of murder. This time, he passed with flying colors. Many have questioned why the police asked narrower questions during the second polygraph, claiming that it was an attempt to clear Mr. S as soon as possible, so they can focus on the other suspects they had in mind. However suspicious Mr. S might have seemed, it was mostly agreed that he had no role in Hae's death, and so he was released and the police moved on. With Mr. S out of the picture, police had to shift their attention elsewhere, and it didn't take long before a new name came into focus. On February 12th, just 3 days after Hae was found, the Baltimore City Police received an anonymous call. The caller, who sounded like a young Asian male, informed the police that they should focus on Hae's ex-boyfriend, Adnan Syed. He claimed that the two had broken up about a week prior to her disappearance, and Leakin Park used to be the place where they would go to hook up. The caller then hung up, but called back a few minutes later with one more claim. He said that one of his friends, Yasser Ali, was told by Adnan that if he ever hurt his girlfriend, meaning if Adnan ever hurt his own girlfriend, then he would drive her car into a lake. Presumably meaning that Adnan would go to great lengths, even driving Hae's car into a lake, to cover his tracks. This anonymous tip honed the police's focus onto Adnan. He'd been in the back of the investigators' minds for a while now. After all, he was the ex-boyfriend that had broken up with the victim around a month before the murder. Surely something like jealousy, envy, or resentment could be the motive they were looking for. 3 days later, on February 15th, police started moving quickly. That morning, Adnan was pulled over for not wearing his seatbelt. At the time, it may have seemed like a routine stop, but it was later revealed that detectives used this to confirm his cell phone number so they could get his phone records. The same day, police got their hands on Hae's diary. On the surface, parts of it didn't look good for Adnan. In one entry, Hae wrote about her and Adnan's time-out week and mentioned Adnan's possessiveness. The second thing is possessiveness. I'm a very independent person. I rarely rely on my parents. Although I love him, it's not like I need him. And I need time for myself and with my friends other than him. How dare he get mad at me for planning to hang out with Aisha? But almost in the same breath, she pivots back to affection, reminding herself how much she still loves him. I just hope that I don't lose him because of this. I love him. When I hold him, I want it to be forever. Like so many of her diary entries, it's conflicted, and in the eyes of the police, probably didn't help Adnan's case. Later that night, they tracked down Yasser Ali, the friend mentioned in the anonymous phone call. Yasser had known Adnan since they were kids, as they went to the same mosque. He said that if Adnan did do this, murder Hae, then he doesn't think Adnan would tell anyone. He'd probably hide it, maybe dump Hae's car into a lake too. Crucially though, Yasser also seems to say, in stray police notes that were later found, he thinks that Adnan had something to do with Hae's death. Now of course this wasn't proof that Adnan did anything, but in the notes detectives scribbled down, it looked an awful lot like suspicion. The next day, February 16th, detectives subpoenaed Adnan's phone records from AT&T. A subpoena is basically a court order that forces a company to hand over whatever records or documents investigators specifically request. In this case, that meant AT&T had to hand over Adnan's call log, a list of every number dialed, and the cell towers his phone had connected to. The information pulled out of this call log would become a major part of the investigation and later, the state's case. Once those logs were in hand, investigators didn't waste time. They began the process of matching numbers to names, filling in the blanks of who Adnan was calling and when. By February 26th, the net was tightening. The call logs were starting to point them towards new names, people in Adnan's orbit like his classmates and friends. One of these names, Jennifer Pusateri, or Jen as her friends called her, showed up a lot in these calls. In fact, on the day Hae disappeared, Jen was the person Adnan called the most, which meant if Adnan was involved in Hae's death, Jen was the one who might hold the key to finding out. That night, police talked to Jen at the police station, but she doesn't offer much information about Adnan or the day of the disappearance, just some names and phone numbers of people she knows. However, the next day, Jen came back, this time with her mother and a lawyer. They began with a sit-down at her attorney's house, and later that same afternoon, headed to the station for a more formal interview. And it was in this interview that Jen dropped her first real bombshell. Although she hadn't mentioned Adnan at all the day before, this time she brought Adnan directly into the story, saying his name, tying him to the day Hae disappeared, and laying out a version of events that would mark a turning point in the case.
For the record, could you please state your full name?
Jennifer Louise Pusateri.
And how old are you, ma'am?
18.
And your date of birth?
This is the point in the story where people's versions of events and the inconsistencies across them become important, so if you weren't paying attention before, I suggest doing so now. According to Jen, on the afternoon Hae went missing, Jay Wilds, a friend of Jen's, came by her house sometime between 1 and 1:30 p.m. He was driving Adnan's car and using Adnan's cell phone, telling Jen that he was waiting for a phone call. That call, she recalled, came around 3:30 to 3:45 p.m., after which Jay quickly left. Later that evening, between 6:30 and 7:30 p.m., Jen received a message on her pager from Jay, asking her to come pick him up. The message, though, was vague enough to leave her a little confused. So Jen called Adnan to clarify and was told that Jay would let her know when and where to pick him up. Around 8 to 8:30 p.m., Jen was contacted again. Jay was now ready for pickup at the Westview Mall parking lot. When she arrived, she saw Jay and Adnan sitting together in Adnan's car, before Jay got into her car.
So then what happens after he gets back to your
When he gets in the car, he's like, okay, put on the seatbelt, let's go. I was like, alright, let's go. And he says, Jen, you gotta swear you won't tell nobody what I'm about to tell you. And I was like, alright. He's like, but I gotta tell you, I gotta tell somebody, I can't, you know? And I was like, alright, what's up, babe? He's like, Adnan killed Hae. And that's when I was just like, whoa, what do you mean Adnan killed Hae? Why, what, how, when, where, you know? Normal questions I guess he would ask.
When you asked why, what did he say?
He said that, Adnan said that Hae broke his heart.
When you asked him how, what did he say?
Said that he strangled her.
Jen goes on to say that Jay told her he'd seen Hae's body in the trunk of Adnan's car, but insisted that he had no part in the murder itself. He'd just given Adnan the shovels he needed to bury the body, dropped him off to do it, picked him up a little while later, then disposed of the shovels in a nearby dumpster. At this point, Jay had asked to be taken to his girlfriend Stephanie's house as it was her birthday. Jen waited in the car while Jay went inside, hugged Stephanie, and stayed for about 10 to 15 minutes. When he came back out though, he wasn't done running errands. He told Jen they needed to stop by the previously mentioned dumpster to wipe down the shovels. From there, the night took on a more normal rhythm, a visit to UMBC, where Jen checked in with her sorority sisters, and then a stop at a friend's place to hang out before finally heading home. The next day though, on the 14th, Jen took Jay to a dumpster so he could get rid of his clothing from the night before. With this interview, Jen provided police not only with the primary suspect, but also a rough timeline of events for the day of Hae's disappearance. However, to fill in the gaps and define the details, investigators needed to hear Jay's side of the story, the man who, according to Jen, actually saw Hae's body. Armed with Jen's statement, police picked up Jay Wilds from his workplace on the night of February 27th and brought him in for questioning. And after talking with him off tape for a couple hours, Jay gave a statement that would come to define the entire investigation. According to Jay, on January 13th, 1999, the day Hae Min Lee went missing, he and Adnan Syed met up around 11:45 a.m. to do some shopping at Westview Mall. The two spent a couple of hours together before Jay dropped Adnan back off at Woodlawn High School at around 12:30 p.m., with Adnan leaving both his car and phone with Jay. But prior to dropping him off, Jay recalls Adnan being notably upset about his recent breakup with Hae.
Prior to dropping Adnan off at school, does he have a conversation with you? about what he's going to do that day, or
He tells me he's gonna kill Hae. I don't believe him. I mean,
the conversation where Adnan tells you he's going to kill Hae? Where does that conversation take place?
in this car, it started off, we were talking about girls. Steph's birthday was coming up, you know, we've been together for 2 years, she's great, this, that, and the other. I can't believe what Hae did to me. He broke my heart like that.
What did he mean by that?
He said that they've been together for a while, and she just all of a sudden, like, I don't want to be with you, I hate you. They couldn't believe someone could be that heartless or something like that. That was how the conversation, how the topic came up. And he's like, I'm gonna kill her, and I figured, you know, him bitching about her breaking his heart, him saying he's gonna kill her, all one in the same type conversation, but he didn't fire any warning signals in my.
When he said he was going to kill her, did he make any mention of how or when he was going to kill her or anything like that?
He said today. That's all he said. He didn't say how, when, where.
If you can, that's been almost 5 or 6 weeks. Try and recall his exact words.
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna kill that bitch.
But Jay recalled that he brushed these comments off as just talk, the kind of venting you don't take seriously, and so he continued on with his day. After dropping Adnan off at school, he went to Jen's house to play video games with her little brother. While there, he received a call from Adnan on the same cell phone he'd left with him. He wanted Jay to pick him up from a strip off of Edmondson Avenue. When Jay arrived, Adnan allegedly said,
And then Pops, he goes, I did it, you don't fucking believe me, I did it. And he pops the trunk open and he's like, he's all bent up and balloon in the trunk.
Okay, when you see this person in the trunk, who is that person?
Haley.
Now you know Haley?
Yes.
How do you know Haley?
I sat next to her in biology.
Shocked, Jay then recalled arguing with Adnan, who eventually instructed Jay to follow him as he drove Hae's car to the I-70 park and ride. There, they left the car and drove together to Patapsco State Park, where Jay said they smoked weed. Later that afternoon, Jay dropped Adnan off at school in time for track practice, which Jay recalls as around 4:30 p.m. After practice, the two reunited at McDonald's, but while they were there, Adnan received a call from a police officer asking if he had seen Hae. This appeared to panic Adnan, asking Jay if he had any shovels to bury Hae's body, who at this point was still in the trunk of the car at the I-70 park and ride. They left for Jay's house to get a shovel and a pick and drove back to Hae's car in hopes of burying her in Leakin Park, now that the police were looking for her. Jay told police initially that he did not physically help Adnan with digging the grave, but watched as he dug the hole, with Hae's body lying on the ground nearby. Once the grave was dug, Adnan moved Hae's body into it. They then disposed of her personal belongings in a dumpster and left her car abandoned in a grassy lot in West Baltimore. The interview dragged on for hours, stretching well past midnight. Piece by piece, Jay Wilds, the prosecution's star witness, laid out his story, messy and long-winded, but still enough to hold the detective's attention. Then, at 2:45 a.m., came the bombshell. Jay led investigators to Hae Min Lee's car, still hidden where it had been left a month earlier. With that final revelation, the missing piece fell into place. At 5:20 a.m., the very same day, police descended onto Adnan Syed's home, and the 17-year-old was arrested for the murder of Hae Min Lee. With the arrest warrant fulfilled, the police moved quickly. They promptly searched Adnan's home, carrying away what seemed like ordinary things: his textbooks, letters, notes, a pair of boots, a set of pants, even his car, positive that at least one of these objects would prove what Adnan had done that day. By sunrise, Adnan, still 17 and reeling from the shock of his arrest, found himself handcuffed to the wall of an interrogation room at the Baltimore City Police Station. And while detectives were urging Adnan to admit his crime, his family on the outside were scrambling to find a lawyer. Word spread quickly through the Moscan community, and within an hour of his arrest, Adnan's family had retained attorney Doug Colbert, who immediately began fighting to shield his young client from the weight of a murder charge. Officers had taken Adnan to the police station, cuffed him to the wall of an interrogation room, and started their questioning. Certain that this was a mistake and that he would be released soon, Adnan waived his right to an attorney. What Adnan didn't know was that just half an hour earlier, attorney Doug Colbert, the one his family had just hired, had called the station demanding that all questioning stop until he could speak with his client. The detectives knew this, but Adnan didn't. Because he never realized he had a lawyer, he never asked for one. And so, despite Colbert's direct request to halt the interview, police pressed on. After nearly 6 hours of interrogation, police finally slid a charging document across the table with Adnan's name printed on it, stating that he was being charged with the premeditated first-degree murder of Hae Min Lee. It was at this point that Adnan began realizing that this was all too real, and now that the police had him, they were not planning on letting him out. While Adnan was being held by police, his family and community rushed to support him. They fundraised to pay for his bail, which his attorney had suggested be set at $25,000. They wrote character letters for the court, and on the day of the bail hearing, poured into the courtroom by the dozens to show support, hoping that with the support of the community, Adnan could be released on bail. But no matter how hard they fought, Adnan was repeatedly denied. At first, the reason why was simply incompetence. His birth date had been written as 1980 instead of 1981. That meant that on paper, he was 18, an adult. And in Maryland at the time, adults charged with a capital crime, when eligible for the death penalty, were automatically denied bail, so believing he was older, the judge denied him. But even after this mistake was cleared up, he was still denied his chance to go home. This time because of a surprising argument made by the prosecution. The prosecutor argued that letting him out would be too dangerous, and that Adnan's large, tight-knit Muslim community gave him limitless resources to flee the country. They claimed he could be on a plane to Pakistan within days, far beyond the reach of extradition, an argument rooted mostly in misguided and prejudiced beliefs rather than facts. And so, the judge denied bail again, and as Adnan waited in the Baltimore City Detention Center until his trial, his family on the outside was devastated. They would come to visit during their allocated time once a week, only able to speak through a mesh grill. According to Adnan, during these visits, he would try and ease his parents' worries about his mental and physical health, making sure to keep an upbeat and happy tone, even if he wasn't. Outside the jail walls, his parents and his current attorney, Doug Colbert, were growing increasingly anxious about the road ahead. The prosecutors on the other side were experienced, and they knew they needed some major firepower of their own. Enter Cristina Gutierrez. In Baltimore's legal circles, her name carried weight. She was known to command a presence in the courtroom and had a reputation of being utterly relentless, the kind of attorney who could rattle even the most seasoned witnesses. For Adnan's family, this was exactly what they wanted, someone who could go toe-to-toe with the state's heavy-hitting prosecutors and fight for their son with the same intensity. And for a time, Cristina Gutierrez had been exactly that, an attorney you hoped to have on your side and prayed you never had to face in court. But by 1999, the Cristina Gutierrez that Adnan's family had placed their faith in wasn't the same one who had built that reputation. Behind her commanding presence was a woman quietly battling a series of severe health issues. Kidney disease, diabetes, and what colleagues described as a sharp mental decline. Former associates recalled that she had grown increasingly irritable and disorganized, her focus slipping under the weight of illness and exhaustion. Unaware of any of this, Adnan's family had no reason to doubt her. To them, she was still the powerhouse attorney that would lead Adnan to a not guilty verdict. So, with Gutierrez at the defense table and Kevin Urich representing the state, the courtroom became the stage for a fight that would decide Adnan's future. The long-awaited trial of Adnan Syed was about to begin. On December 9, 1999, as prosecutor Kevin Urich rose to present the opening statement, he knew that much of Baltimore would be leaning in to listen. The state wasted no time laying out its story. He began by setting the scene, 18-year-old Hae Min Lee being buried in Leakin Park. A bright and promising teenager whose life was cut short by none other than the villain in his narrative, Adnan Syed. Prosecutors described Adnan as a lovesick, honor-bound teenager who had been pushed past his breaking point. They told the jury that Adnan had fallen for Hae Min Lee so deeply that he was willing to sacrifice his family's trust and his religion just to be with her. So, when Hae ended the relationship, they claimed Adnan simply couldn't accept it and, quote, set out to kill Hae Min Lee. They assured the jury that phone records, diary entries, and witness testimony would all align to prove Adnan's guilt beyond any reasonable doubt. Over the next several days, the state began building that foundation piece by piece, presenting early witnesses like Hae's brother and Officer Adcock, before bringing in the cornerstone of the entire case, Jay Wilds. Jay was the only person who claimed to have first-hand knowledge of the murder, and his story became the narrative the state relied on to explain how, when, and why Adnan supposedly killed Hae. But before the state could finish presenting its case, Jay's testimony would be cut short because of an argument that broke out between Gutierrez and the judge. We'll get into the substance of Jay's testimony later, but when he was on the stand, Gutierrez insisted that she had never seen a phone record the prosecution was using as an exhibit. After going back and forth for a few seconds, the judge called both attorneys up to the bench where Gutierrez claimed that the judge was calling her a liar. Apparently, she said this a little too loud, as one of the jury members heard this over the white noise machine. This, of course, destroyed Gutierrez's credibility in front of the jury, and they had no choice but to grant a mistrial and start over. The beginning of the second trial on January 27, 2000, granted the prosecution a second chance to refine their strategy based on what they learned in the first trial. Prosecutor Kevin Urich began his opening statement following much of the same story as the first, but this time, the prosecution needed to make a key adjustment. They knew their case hinged on Jay, the witness whose testimony formed the backbone of the state's narrative, but with his involvement in the crime and his background as a drug dealer, there were concerns that the jury saw him as unreliable. To remedy this, Urich presented Jay not as a co-conspirator who turned to police to save his own skin, but as an unwilling participant, a young man manipulated by Adnan who understood that if things went wrong, he might escape blame, but Jay, a poor and vulnerable black teenager who sold weed to get by, would not. In the defense's opening statement that came right after, Gutierrez frames the case as one built entirely on the words of a liar, saying the prosecution's entire theory rests on a single man. Jay's story, she says, changes every time he tells it, from where he was to where calls were made to how events supposedly unfolded. Before we begin, a quick note. This case is one of the most popular true crime cases on the internet, and there are countless arguments on both sides that have surfaced over the years. We're going to discuss the key arguments made by both sides of the case, but of course, we can't fit every topic and debate into one video. With that being said, let's start at the beginning. January 13th, 1999 started as a normal Woodlawn winter day. Hae would start the day interning at Hope Schaub's French class, usually helping her grade papers or do computer work, while Adnan started his day off in photography class. But before the school day had even really picked up, something small would happen, something that didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but would later become incredibly important. That morning, Krista, who was one of Hae's and Adnan's friends, overheard Adnan asking Hae for a ride after school. Adnan normally had his own car, but Krista would later testify that on this particular day, his car was either with his brother or in the shop. She doesn't really remember. Becky, another mutual friend of Adnan and Hae, said that she also heard Hae needed to give Adnan a ride after school, but by the end of the day, Hae said she couldn't because she had something else to do. What exactly she had to do, Becky doesn't know. This ride detail has been heavily debated and picked apart by followers of this case. It's important because it looks bad for Adnan if he, the main suspect for Hae's murder, asked her for a ride after school, the same day she would go missing. It would have been an excuse to get in her car alone with her, and the fact that she never made it to pick up her cousin by 3:30, an errand she took very seriously, means that between 2:15, when school let out, and 3:30, something must have happened. Adnan being with her right after school fits into this timeline. What's worse is that although it was true that Adnan did not have his car later that day since he gave it to Jay, at this point in the morning, this plan was not yet in place. When he asked Hae for a ride, his car was still sitting in the school parking lot, and there was no evidence that he had any plans yet to loan it to Jay. So why ask for a ride at all? The very first time Adnan talked to police, he said that Hae was supposed to give him a ride, but he was delayed and she probably left without him. But in later interactions with police, Adnan seems to go back on this, saying that he wouldn't have asked Hae for a ride since he has his own car. In fact, even years later, when asked about this during an interview, he says that everyone knew Hae had to pick up her little cousin, so she's not doing anything for anyone right after school. So did it happen or not? Did Adnan ask her for a ride or did he have no reason to? On the one hand, some followers of the case think that the answer is obvious. Adnan asked Hae for a ride so he could get her alone after school, get into her car, and murder her. Those who support this theory point to another detail. If Hae truly couldn't do anything for anyone right after school, then why did Adnan allegedly tell his own attorneys in 1999 that the two of them sometimes went to the Best Buy parking lot for romantic encounters before she would go to pick her cousin up? This would suggest that yes, actually she did have time for Adnan before she had to pick up her cousin, and during this time, he could have committed the crime. But others claim that this ride detail has been blown out of proportion by police and prosecutors. Yes, there is a 1999 defense memo where Adnan allegedly mentions past romantic encounters in the Best Buy parking lot, but by then, he and Hae had already broken up, and according to that same memo, they had stopped having these encounters after they broke up. As for why Adnan changed his story about the ride, some believe that once it became clear that Hae was truly missing, he recognized how suspicious the ride would look and denied it to avoid the implication. In any case, let's move on. Adnan's next period was English class, where he gave Stephanie McPherson, his close friend and Jay's girlfriend, a stuffed reindeer, as it was her birthday. Adnan, in later interviews, remembers wondering if Jay had gotten his girlfriend a gift as well. He had a feeling that he hadn't, so he wanted to make sure he got one, so Adnan called Jay at 10:45 a.m. to ask. Now this call, like every call made that day, was routed through nearby cell towers. Basically, every time a call goes through, the phone company records which tower handled the signal, along with the exact time and how long the call lasted. Those records let investigators say roughly where a phone was when it made a call. This topic, of whether these call logs are accurate to the location of the person making or receiving the call, has become one of the most hotly debated elements of the entire case, because it was used heavily by the state to corroborate Jay's story. So can the location data given by these call logs be trusted or not? Well, first off, if someone makes an outgoing call, like Adnan just did, it's widely accepted that the location data tied to that call is accurate. So the call from Adnan to Jay at 10:45 a.m. pings the tower whose range covers Woodlawn High School. So we can reasonably assume that at the time of the call, Adnan was at school like he says he was. But the problem, in what people have been debating for years, is the accuracy of the incoming call data. This is where it gets a little complicated. During the trial in 2000, an expert on cell network technology, Abe Waranowitz, testified that both incoming and outgoing calls location data is reliable, and both can be used to estimate where someone was during the time of the call. Years later, though, it was found that AT&T themselves, the company that was providing these call logs to police, had issued a disclaimer saying that while outgoing calls are reliable for location status, any incoming calls are not. They even put it in capital letters. When this came to the expert's attention, the one who testified during the trial, he said that if he had known about the disclaimer, he wouldn't have trusted incoming calls for location at all. In the following years, the state would try to defend the reliability of incoming call data, but those arguments were denied. Ultimately, the courts accepted that the incoming calls couldn't reliably tell you someone's location, just as AT&T had warned from the beginning. So keep in mind from now on, when someone receives an incoming call, we can't say for sure where they were. In any case, Adnan calls Jay at 10:45 a.m. and offers to lend him his car so he can get his girlfriend a gift for her birthday. Jay agrees, and so, at around lunchtime, they both go to the mall, although which mall exactly is something Jay would change between interviews. And that's a pattern you'll start to notice. Details in Jay's story tend to shift. Sometimes they're small details, but other times they're important. We'll get to this later. It's during this hangout that Jay recalls is the first time Adnan mentions that he's going to kill Hae. At least that's what he initially told police. In subsequent interviews, he tells police this conversation actually happened the day before, and he describes Adnan as being more serious. Instead of just brushing these comments off like he said he did in the first interview, he says that Adnan told him how he would kill Hae, that he would tell her his car was broken down and he needed a ride, and that he would leave his car and phone with Jay the next day so he could pick him up after he was done. Jay thought he was so serious that he told Jen later that day, to which Jen just responded, "This mother is crazy, yo." After their mall trip, Adnan gets dropped back off at school and leaves his car and phone, which he just bought a few days earlier, with Jay. Adnan later says that he does this so he can call Jay to pick him up from track practice after school. Fast forward to 2:15 and the final school bell rings. As school was letting out, multiple people later testified that they saw Hae after school. Aisha says she saw her right when the bell rang at 2:15. Becky says 2:20. Inez 2:30, but is later proved to be remembering the wrong day. As far as we know, Debbie sees Hae the latest, at 2:45 p.m., although her account is a little shaky. She remembers Hae wearing a different outfit than the one she was found with. As for Adnan, he claims that after school he went to the library, where he studied until track practice began. The real witness, though, that makes this window of time interesting is Asia McLean. After Adnan's arrest, Asia wrote him letters saying that she clearly remembered seeing and talking to him at the library after school that day. She states in a letter, "I know that you can't have visitors, so I decided to write you a letter. I'm not sure if you remember talking to me in the library on January 13th, but I remember chatting with you. Throughout your actions that day, I have reason to believe in your innocence." And from her second letter, "It's weird, since I realized that I saw you in the public library that day, you've been on my mind. The conversation that we had has been on my mind. Everything was cool that day. Maybe if I would have stayed with you or something, this entire situation could have been avoided." This was an incredibly important witness because almost no one else could account for Adnan's whereabouts after school. During the trial, this period was a complete gap of time where, other than Jay's story, no one could say for sure what Adnan was doing or where he went. But although Asia could account for Adnan during this crucial time period, she was never contacted, interviewed, and didn't testify at the trial. She was basically forgotten by the defense. This seems like an obvious mistake. Why wouldn't the defense talk to a witness that could give their client an alibi? After the trial, this became one of the biggest criticisms of Adnan's lawyer, Cristina Gutierrez. To many, it looked like a textbook example of ineffective counsel, a failure so glaring that it could have easily changed the verdict. For a long time, that was the general belief, that Gutierrez had dropped the ball. Although, as with everything in this case, some people have differing opinions. They question why Adnan did nothing with the letters when he received them. Why wasn't he more adamant with Gutierrez about contacting this critical witness? And why was Asia the only one who could recall seeing Adnan that day when her boyfriend Derek and his friend Johnson were there as well? Like much of this case, these questions have many answers, but regardless of the debate surrounding it, let's move on. So now you've heard Adnan's story and his alibi of what he was doing during the critical hours of 2:15 p.m. when school let out and 4:30 p.m. when track practice began. He was at the library, with Asia as his only witness. But what about Jay? Recall that according to Jay's story, Adnan told him that he was going to kill Hae this day, and when he finished the job, he would call Jay to come and pick him up. So Jay was at Jen's house waiting for Adnan's "come and get me" call. According to the prosecution at trial, this call came at 2:36 p.m. and lasted for 5 seconds. Before this call, they say, Adnan had gotten a ride from Hae after school, strangled her in her car, and was now at the Best Buy parking lot with Hae lying dead in the trunk of her car, calling Jay via payphone to help him dispose of the body. Now this call has been hotly debated over the years by experts and internet sleuths alike. The prosecution's claim that this was Adnan's "come and get me" call would mean the following two things had to be true. 1. Between the time school let out at 2:15 p.m. and 2:36 p.m. when the call was made, Adnan and Hae drove to the Best Buy parking lot where Adnan killed Hae. 2. Hae was dead by 2:36 p.m. With these 2 points, the prosecution creates a timeline that hinges on 21 minutes. If both Hae and Adnan were at school until 2:15, as was confirmed by various students, that left only 21 minutes for them to leave campus, drive a mile to the Best Buy, commit the murder, and for Adnan to call Jay. On paper, that drive might have taken under 10 minutes, but at 2:15 on a school day, it was a different story. The hallways were packed with 1,500 students, the parking lot jammed with buses, and traffic on the roads. Adnan would have had to make it all the way through that, then overpower and strangle Hae, all before 2:36 p.m. It's a tight timeline, one that leaves virtually no room for delay. And the fact that, as we mentioned previously, some of Hae's friends saw her well after school ended makes the timeline all the more unlikely. Even Jay, across his various different stories, consistently placed the "come and get me" call at around 3:40 p.m., more than an hour after the 2:36 call the prosecution latched onto. Regardless of these many discrepancies, let's try and continue following Jay's story. After receiving this "come and get me" call, Jay drove over to the meetup point that Adnan specified, which changes between tellings. First he says it was Edmondson Avenue, and then later the Best Buy parking lot near Woodlawn High School. Regardless, after he pulled up, Adnan then revealed Hae Min Lee dead in the trunk of her own car. After showing him the body, the two drive to the I-70 park and ride to ditch Hae's Nissan. And once again, after they leave the car at the park and ride, Jay's story starts shifting. At first, he says they went to Patapsco State Park to smoke weed, during which Adnan supposedly talked about the murder and his reasons for doing it. But in later versions of the story, this park trip vanished entirely. They simply went to buy weed, and then Jay dropped Adnan off at track practice. The deed by that point was already done. Now remember, between the end of school and the beginning of track practice, the critical time during which Jay claims the murder and pickup was taking place, Adnan claims that he was at the library, an alibi that could not be corroborated by anyone apart from Asia McClain. These critical 2 hours of unaccounted time also housed what many consider the smoking gun for the case against Adnan, which came in the form of a simple call to one Nisha Tana. Nisha was a girl Adnan had met at a party around New Year's and continued to pursue later on. They apparently spoke quite often, with Adnan even stating that he had her on speed dial on his new cell phone. The reason she became so critical to the case was because on January 13, 1999, Adnan's call log shows a call to Nisha at 3:32 p.m. According to Adnan, he was at the library at this time and his phone was with Jay, who had his car. But Nisha is Adnan's friend. Jay doesn't know her. So why would Jay call a random person on Adnan's phone without him present? Unless Adnan really was there, making Jay's story of the murder plausible. During this call, she states that Adnan was with Jay at a store and even briefly put Jay on the phone to say hello. Jay confirmed this in his second interview and in court, saying he remembered speaking to Nisha during that call. Both of their accounts place Adnan and Jay together between 2:15 and 4:30 p.m. on January 13th, directly contradicting Adnan's claim that he was at the library. The validity of the Nisha call has been heavily debated, given how crucial it is in undermining Adnan's alibi. Many argued that Nisha misremembered the call, since she recalled speaking to Adnan and Jay while they were at Jay's video store, but Jay didn't start that job until the end of January, meaning he could not have been working there on the 13th. Adnan insists he has no memory of the call, stating its appearance in the call log must have been the result of an accidental butt dial, and the length could be attributed to the answering machine picking up, but Nisha had no answering machine set up for her phone. The call was also included on the phone bill, meaning the call had to have been answered as AT&T does not charge for unanswered calls. All this looked very bad for Adnan, until years later the Serial podcast found an old service agreement from AT&T, stating that unanswered calls that continuously ring for longer than 60 seconds are subject to charge. If the Nisha call was just a butt dial that went unanswered for 2 minutes and 22 seconds, AT&T might still have logged it, meaning Adnan's alibi could still remain intact. After these 2 critical hours in which Jay states the crime was committed, Jay drops Adnan off at track practice at around 3:30 to 4 p.m. Once practice was over, him and Jay headed over to their friend Christy's house, where they smoked some weed and hung out. Here we find another example of Jay's ever-changing story, as in his first interview, Jay states that after picking Adnan up from track practice, they went to McDonald's to eat, but by his second interview and testimony, this trip completely disappears from the record, and a new character, Christy, emerges. Christy, an acquaintance to Jay and unknown to Adnan, was somewhat shocked to see these 2 obviously high men on her doorstep. She was a sorority sister of Jen's, and therefore had met Jay in group settings, but not Adnan. According to her testimony in trial, she recalled both Jay and Adnan acting shady when they were at her house. In the time Jay and Adnan were at Christy's house, the call log shows that Adnan's cell received 3 incoming calls. Although unconfirmed, the first was most likely from Hae's brother Young Lee, asking about his sister's whereabouts. At this point, the Lee family had already contacted the police to report Hae missing. During the second call, however, Christy recalls Adnan saying things like, "They're gonna come talk to me, what should I say, what should I do?" As incriminating as this seems, many people believe that this call may have come from Hae's friend Aisha, who was calling to let Adnan know that the police had called her asking about Hae, and they would likely call him soon too, making Adnan's reaction somewhat believable. Sure enough, at 6:24 p.m., another call came in, lasting 4 minutes and 15 seconds. This was Detective Adcock calling to ask Adnan what he knew about Hae's whereabouts that day. Shortly after receiving the call, Christy recalls that Adnan and Jay, quote, jumped up and left very abruptly, leaving their smokes behind. From here, the timeline presented by the prosecution claims that Adnan, upon learning that the police had caught wind of Hae's disappearance, quickly returned to the I-70 park and ride where they abandoned Hae's car and body. As usual, Jay's story about the event has changed throughout his many interviews and testimonies, but the common thread is that after leaving Christy's house, Adnan decided it was time to bury the body. They picked up some shovels, then headed back to collect Hae's body and find a place to bury her, which was eventually determined to be Leakin Park. Although, the circumstances and details surrounding the burial remain hazy. In his first 2 interviews, Jay says that he went straight from his house to the park and ride and then to Leakin Park, but in his testimony, he claims that Adnan had him wait at a McDonald's for 45 minutes before meeting to bury Hae. In the first interview, he states that he wasn't involved in the act of burying Hae's body, but this changes by the second interview, where he states that he did help Adnan dig. When asked about his ever-changing story, Jay says that he lied to police out of fear of repercussion. At the time, he was a young black man in Baltimore who was selling weed and other drugs, and he had already had some negative experiences with police, so he admitted to changing the story to avoid punishment. Not only this, but he also states he altered the story to avoid involving those he cared about, such as his family and friends, but with the loss of a consistent story also comes the loss of the truth. Regardless, after finding a suitable place to bury Hae, Adnan, or Jay and Adnan depending on which version of the story you believe, dig a shallow grave for Hae in Leakin Park. During this time, 2 very important calls come through to Adnan's phone, not so important by content, but important by location. According to the call log and the cell tower information provided by AT&T, the 709 and 716 incoming calls routed through tower L689B, whose coverage area includes the area of Leakin Park where Hae's body was found. For a long time, this was one of the most definitive pieces pointing to Adnan's guilt, because the cell tower pings show that his phone was in Leakin Park at the exact time the prosecution believed that Hae was being buried. Although, as we've discussed before, there is a whole debate about the reliability of incoming call data, so whether you believe it or not is up to you. Continuing with the story presented by the state, once the deed was done, Adnan and Jay left Hae's car on a grassy patch in a residential lot off of Edgewood Street. Adnan then disposed of Hae's clothes and the shovels used to bury her in a dumpster near Westview Mall, with Jay calling Jen to pick him up soon after. From here, the state's version of events links back to the same sequence we already walked through earlier, the calls with Jen, wiping down the shovels, and finishing his day at Christie's house, where the horrors that took place on January 13th, 1999 finally came to an end. While certain details in these timelines emerged only after the trial, the jury received the core version of the story on January 27, 2000. After both sides completed their closing statements, the members of the jury were left to determine the fate of Adnan Syed, and within only 2 hours, the jury came back with their verdict. Adnan Syed, guilty on the charge of the first-degree murder of Hae Min Lee. His sentence, life in prison plus 30 years. Following the conviction, Adnan's family pressed forward with appeals, but this time without Gutierrez, whose deteriorating mental state had ultimately led to her disbarment that same year. In 2002, during their direct appeal, they argued that Jay's free attorney provided to him by the prosecution, as well as the concealed terms of his plea deal, constituted a Brady violation. A post-conviction relief or PCR appeal followed in 2010. Both were rejected. With hope fading, Adnan's loved ones made a move that would change his case forever. They contacted journalist Sarah Koenig, who turned a quiet Baltimore case into a worldwide story. When Serial launched in 2014, Adnan's case became one of the internet's first major true crime sensations. With this newfound spotlight and millions of listeners, new and competing theories began to emerge. The theories about this case can generally be split into two camps, those who believe Adnan is guilty and those who believe he is innocent. Within the innocent camp, theorists believe that through both the investigation and the trial, police and prosecutors unjustly focused all of their attention on Adnan, singling him out as their main suspect well before they had any evidence to justify it. Prosecutors relied heavily on Jay Wilds, even though his story shifted constantly and only occasionally matched the phone records. Still, police focused almost entirely on Adnan, giving little attention to other suspects, like Hae's new boyfriend, Dawn. Dawn was dismissed early because he appeared to have a solid alibi that was backed by his manager, but that manager turned out to be his mother. Further digging revealed inconsistencies. He used a different out-of-sequence employee number that day, worked a shift that didn't actually exist, and couldn't be reached by police until 1:30 a.m. The more people examined his story, the weaker his alibi looked, but evidently, that didn't seem to be the police's concern. These concerns, paired with his lawyer's ineffective counsel, suggest that Adnan was convicted in a process that never gave him a fair chance.
You know, back in 1999, I was a 17-year-old high school student, and I was arrested and charged with a crime I didn't commit. A very close and dear friend of mine named Hae Lee, she was murdered, and I was ultimately charged and taken to trial and wrongfully convicted of that crime. And I would go on to spend...
On the other hand, the camp that believes in Adnan's guilt claims that Adnan got his day in court. The police did their jobs, and in the end, he was found guilty because ultimately, he committed the crime. To them, there are no other suspects that have nearly as much evidence stacked against them as Adnan. Jay's testimony may shift, but the core tenets of it still seem plausible, and he still led police to their missing piece, Hae's car. If he was lying, why implicate himself as an accomplice? To this group, the simplest explanation remains that despite its flaws, the case still holds together in a way that others do not. Today, Adnan Syed is a free man. Thanks to the astronomical popularity of Serial and the tireless efforts of his family and friends, his case was reopened in 2015. What followed was a series of legal battles played out in the public eye, leading to his conviction being vacated, reinstated, and then eventually resentenced to include the 20 years he already served in prison, plus 5 years probation. Although his murder conviction still stands, he is now free to live a life beyond bars. Despite the millions of people invested in the case, we may never know what exactly happened to 18-year-old Hae Min Lee on January 13, 1999. The life of a fiercely beloved teenager was tragically cut short, but over 20 years later, the question of justice still remains for those she left behind. And until that question is finally answered, the case will continue to occupy the minds of the public, suspended between what we know, what we don't, and what may never be uncovered.